The hardest part, I think, of my story would be back when I was about 18 years old. I got married and I had 2 children and went through a divorce and really lost my way during that divorce. And I ended up losing my children, my first 2 daughters, due to drug addiction. Their father, basically I ended up homeless, and I was, again, addicted to really hard drugs. And my children were living with their father, and I lost complete contact with my first 2 daughters. And then that went on for several years, and I ended up in a relationship with a person who I used with, and I ended up having a 3rd daughter at that time. It was a domestic violent relationship, and it continued to be really toxic. Eventually, I was getting arrested for possession of drugs, and I just kind of got to that point where homeless, didn't have any of my children, didn't have any of my family members, my mom, my dad, no friends. And I just really was in a dark place. And after about finally getting to that point where I just knew something needed to change, I finally was able to go into a treatment facility with several charges against me. I had a choice of either going to prison or doing a 6-month inpatient, 6 months out, and 2 years of probation. And so I decided to go ahead and go to treatment. And even then, I knew things needed to change, but I didn't go to church. I didn't believe, I believed, but I didn't think I needed, God's help. I was one of those that felt like I could just do this on my own. I'm always one of those that I got this, I'm in control, I can do this. And, it just got to the point where I just continued to do that, and I went to treatment, and then I ended up getting back with that person, my 3rd daughter's dad, and actually stayed with them another 10 more years. And then things started to get bad again. And I was losing, my homes, my cars, I was trying to support a family and trying to do all that. I had my 3rd daughter back after going to treatment, but I still didn't have a relationship with my 2 older daughters. And then there was a situation that happened, and there was an attack on my life by him. And I ended up going to court. He tried to press charges and say that I assaulted him when it was self-defense. So at that point, I knew something seriously had to change. And so after I went through the court battle, and the judge threw it out of court and said, okay, you're free to go. It wasn't, there were going to be no charges against me. I had an attorney say to me, she's like, you need to figure this out. She says, if you stay with him, she says, you're either going to be in jail for killing him or he's going to kill you, one of the two. And at that point, being very distant from my mom and dad at that time, I really didn't know who else to turn to. And so I finally gave in, and I just knew something had to change. And I called my mom, and they said, okay, you and your daughter can move down here, her granddaughter. You can move down here, and you need to get down here to Oregon. I was in Washington at the time. You can get to Oregon, but you need to get back on your feet. You need to find a job. Need to do all that stuff. So that's what I did. I came down here. It was hard for me because, I was always one of those that I can do this. I can take, control of everything. I don't need anybody's help. I'm still very independent that way, right? I don't feel like I need people's help, but I knew at that time I needed it. And so I moved down here, and it was the best thing that I could have ever done. I moved to Hillsboro and was able to get back on my feet and find a job. And take care of my daughter and raise her. And my 2 older daughters eventually were back in my life as I was starting to get better, and work through that. I was no longer on drugs at that time, but then I really got into this 9 years ago. working in downtown Portland, it was kind of the thing to do, to go hit the local clubs, to just go and do happy hour or all that. And because I didn't have any friends or anything like that, I started to get really lonely. And I had somebody ask me, hey, you want to go out and have a drink, that sort of thing. And I was like, okay, it's not drugs. It's socially acceptable. I can go hang out with them. And then not but a year after that, I was like completely just lost with the alcohol, finding myself, over drinking to the point where I was blacking out, and just trying to make excuses for, well, I wasn't doing drugs anymore, but, I can drink alcohol. It's okay. It's socially acceptable. So 9 years ago, I found myself in a very precarious position, and I ended up the following day, after being, completely blacked out with alcohol, that I found myself in a 12-step program. And I started a little over 9 years ago back into recovery. With that, I continued to just, learn the program. One of the biggest thing in the program, of course, is the 12 steps. I kept hearing, you need to get a higher power. You need to get a higher power. And I'm like, okay, fine. I'll work the program. I'll do what I need to do, And then as I grew in the program, I realized my higher power was God. And it was God in a Christian sense. It wasn't good orderly direction, as some people like to call it. It wasn't whatever they made up to be. It was God. I was raised a Catholic. And so I always believed in God. I just never really understood what it was like to follow Jesus, and what God was going to do for me, how he could help me, and how he could save me, It was just kind of one of those, to me, in the Catholic religion, it was like, okay, you have to say these penance, you have to do this, you have to do that. And I really had a hard time with that because I couldn't do it perfectly. And I'm one of those that wants to do everything right and to the T and perfectly. And so as I was in the 12-step program, I realized that as I was growing, I was starting to understand, God and what that means for my life and what that means for recovery. And so I continued to just work that program for about 5 years. And as I was growing into that, I realized that I really wasn't a part of like a community, and I wasn't part of, there was a lot missing in my mind. Though I was part of the recovery community, I was understanding my higher power in a Christian sense. And so I tried to talk about my God, my higher power in a Christian sense. And in these 12-step programs, they're kind of just, can you just kind of tone it down, Andrea? It was just one of those things that it really made me feel uncomfortable. And then I recently just moved over here to Aloha. And I started realizing I needed to find, some sort of church, and get involved. And because I had no other friends, I had nothing it was just work. That's all I did was work. And so, and then my story comes around here to moving just right across the street over here off Rosa Road. And I started looking for a church. I started hearing, you need to find a church, and I just wanted to find somewhere where I belonged, where I fit in. As I mentioned to you, being a Catholic, and I felt like I couldn't do it perfectly. So while I was looking for a church, I kept driving by here, and I noticed that Westside was a church, and I'm like, wow, that's just right around the block, right? So I went online and saw No Perfect People Allowed. That's really, I think, after my bout with alcohol, that's really when I knew I needed to start seeking, his help and figure out what I'm going to do and how my life is going to move forward. So, and I tell everybody this, the No Perfect People Allowed, it really hit home for me because it's like, oh gosh, I can breathe now. I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to do this perfectly, And so I've been able to just continue to grow with the church and understand what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ, and that I need God. I need God in my life every day, every minute of the day, some days more than others. And that's kind of how I ended up here, And then I tell everybody my first service here was the first time I heard about Celebrate Recovery. Yeah, it was just kind of interesting because here I was struggling to continue with other 12-step programs and talking about God in a Christian sense. And then I hear this 12-step program, that this recovery program of Celebrate Recovery. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. I really think I could do that, And so I started coming here, kind of off and on and going to Celebrate Recovery. And it just felt like it was the right thing for me. So it continued my recovery, my process of recovery, and it continued to help me move forward with that. And as I was going to Celebrate Recovery, I started realizing I need a relationship with Jesus. And I want to learn everything I can. And as I continue to grow, it just blossomed. I have about a little over 25 years off of hard drugs. And I just celebrated on the 23rd, right before Thanksgiving, I celebrated 9 years of not drinking alcohol. It's just the desire to want to understand what it means to follow Jesus, and the desire to understand God and what this does for me in my life is it's just tremendous for me. It just continues to grow, and I live a beautiful life today. I'm still doing it on my own, so to speak, as far as going to work and not having a husband and all that kind of stuff, but I'm not doing it alone anymore. And I have all my family members in my life today. My mother, my mom, my dad, my 3 daughters, all 3 of them that I have lost have been back in my life over the years. My 2 oldest daughters weren't a part of my life they were taken away when they were young by their dad, and rightfully so. They needed to be in a safe place. And, I've had my 3rd daughter, they were gone 12 years. So they were 18 before they even started to come back into my life. So I didn't get to raise them or be a part of their childhood. But today we are building a new life and building a new relationships with each other. And I get to see them. My 3rd daughter, who has been with me through all of this, who actually came from Washington down here, has been a part of my life for years. I've had her ever since after I went to treatment and I got her back. We have the best relationship, her and I, so we talk every day. She's just a good kid, and, and I get to have that relationship, and I have many other relationships, that have been reconciled, like I said, my mom, my dad, and my brother, and now I just have lots of friends and lots of people in my life today. And so, yeah, it was tough. Coming from a domestic violent relationship, I've lost homes, I've lost, vehicles, I've had to start over many times, but each time it just gets better and better, and I haven't had to start over in a long time though. So I'm really grateful for that. Well, helping others, and especially in recovery, it's really a big thing for me because for many years, I've gone through all this and I've had so many losses, and, I just believe that I didn't go through all of that for nothing. The loss of children, the loss of homes, the loss of jobs, over and over, coming out of a domestic violent relationship, all of that, I didn't work that hard and trusting God to help me through this for nothing. What I've learned is that I have a purpose. And my purpose is to share that story that because today I have, like I said, my friends, I have family and my children. I have a good job. I have had women tell me, oh, well, I can't make it. I have felonies. Well, I have had 2 felonies, and, and it's been a fight for me to get back on my feet and to have good jobs. And what that means to me is that all that I've been through has to be shared, because others need to see that you can come from a domestic violent relationship and loss of jobs and loss of family members, loss of children, and come from all of that and have all of that back. It's not impossible. But what I realized is that I needed to do that with the belief in God and following Jesus, because to me, that's the redeeming grace that God provides for you. I get that opportunity to not just share my story, but just be an example that we can come from this and be this today, that it's not impossible. It's not. I think that just by sharing my story and being a part of the, recovery field and supporting, Celebrate Recovery and continue to do that, I believe that gives others hope. Back in the day, if I had seen more people tell their story, maybe I would have had more hope way back then, but who knows? I mean, it could have been and not been, but you know what? This is my story. So this is what I had to go through to be able to share that with others, by being able to support different types of recovery, or different types of recovery programs, or, that sort of thing. But just truly showing that we can come from basically nothing and the loss of everything to having everything back in our life, as long as we work towards that and we just be honest about it and continue to work. Program of recovery is not easy. It's not easy. And sometimes when they talk about doing it one day at a time, some days it's like 1 minute at a time. And for some people, it could be 1 second at a time. But you know what? Whether it's 1 second, 1 day, that all adds up. It means a lot for me to be able to share my story, because I don't want it to be for nothing. And I don't want to be selfish and just keep it to myself. I want to be an example and show people that recovery is possible.